I don't deserve such a love, something so kind and true. Why do you still call out my name when I have only hidden from you? They tell me what you did for me, but it's so hard for me to believe.
Okay. So you guys in the quiver, go ahead. You can be excused. Everyone else that's not going anywhere, you can have a seat. And then after they dismiss all the younger ones, we'll go with Miss Nayla. And Brandon Cloud, I need that tablet, sir. Okay, are we live yet, or? Yes. We are? All right, so we want to welcome everybody that's joining us online. Hope you're having a great evening. We're getting ready for a round of storms to come through here, so I'll later tonight. Beth, don't you have a few things you wanted to announce real quick?
I don't think so.
I thought you were going to announce about all the stuff over there. Okay, well, I didn't want to start announcing and you say, I was going to do that. So.
Oh, well, he knows better than to give me the microphone. I'm not going to say just one thing. No, he was talking about the lost and found, and we know that those of you on live stream, it's probably not yours unless that you came to Sukkot, and unless you email me right now, I'm sorry. You probably haven't missed it. So, and if you're part of the congregation and you're at home and you know something, you better hurry up and text somebody because it's getting ready to go bye-bye. So what's over there in the fellowship hall on those two tables, if you'll stop by that before you leave tonight, because after tonight, it's gone. So it's free game. Whatever is over there, there's some pretty good stuff. I've been checking out, like, the little elephant wrap and all that. It's like different things. Oh, okay. See, somebody beat me to it. See what I'm saying? One of the kids got it. So he'll share with me, though. I know he will. So that was it. And then read your emails. Okay, most of you did because you are you confessing? Okay. I'm sorry, you need to talk to your wife about that. Okay, anyway, read your email. It's full of information, and that we do that so that I don't take up valuable time standing up here going through all of it because we're all big kids. Except for Bill. Oh, see that? I got the awes. They feel bad for you.
Well, they should.
You got an awe club.
An awe club? Okay. All right. Yeah, well, that's what she tells me. So I'm going to start acting like one. All right. All righty. Well, good evening, everybody. We weren't here last week, so you'd think I'd have everything together here. I think I'm going to eventually have to get a little wider. No, I think I'm going to make it. It's the coffee cup. It's. I need the coffee is what I need. All right. Well, anyway, we've been talking about things leading up to the flood, and I think this was probably going to be our last session that we spend on talking about this particular topic, and then we're going to move on into the book of Genesis a little bit more. I was trying to decide whether or not I wanted to decide for us what we were going to continue on with. or if I was going to open it up for suggestions. And so I thought about the latter for about 2 seconds. And then I just said, no, I'll just decide for us. And then as we go along, if some ideas pop up and you want to share those with me, we'll see. But anyway, let's go over to Genesis chapter 6. How's everyone doing tonight? Okay. Before we dismiss, make certain I save a little time that if we have any prayer requests here for people who want to share that with us. All right? I meant to do that earlier, and it just slipped my mind. All right, but we're in Genesis chapter 6, and I'm going to read a few verses, and then we'll talk about a few of the things that are mentioned here. We've talked about the sons of God and the Nephilim. In fact, I was asked tonight if I was going to talk about the Nephilim again because somebody wanted to go out to the car and get their tinfoil to make a tinfoil hat. But I said, no, we won't do that. I'm not going to say who that person was. No. Anyway, so we've talked about all those things, and what I hope everyone will take away from this after listening is that there's a lot more to talk about where men are concerned and what their contribution to all the things that led up to the flood encompassed, more so than outside influences. And it boils down, as far as I'm concerned, to something the Creator talks about again and again and again and again, and that is don't mix holy with the unclean. Don't mix the clean things with the profane. So in Genesis chapter 6, verse 13, it said, "That God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth." And this isn't something I want to get too far into, but just to pose a question here. He says, the end of all flesh has come before me. So this is one of those cases or verses, maybe, I would ask the question, does the word all mean all? Well, you understand why I'm asking, right? Because did all flesh die? No, there was some flesh that was spared, right? Okay, so I have a reason for asking that, and I'm setting you up for something that we're going to hit down the road. Not tonight, but somewhere down the road. We're going to come back to that. But sometimes that word in Hebrew is translated all for us. It doesn't necessarily mean every last single one. And here's an example of that. So just kind of file that away back in your mind. But he says, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, through those people there. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So he's speaking to Noah, make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and outside with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. And you shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark in its side, and you shall make it with a lower, a second, and third decks. And behold, I myself am bringing the floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. So let's talk about a few of the Hebrew words here. And the first one we're going to talk about is the word that is translated as ark. And so, John, you're all ready for me, okay? And the first one is this word here. And it's pronounced teva. Teva. And this is the word for ark. But in Hebrew, more literally, it's kind of like an empty box. It's more of a box. That's the idea in the word. And this is the same Hebrew word that is used to describe the ark that Moses was put in, the one that was made out of reed grass. It was also called a teva. So it's a little cubicle or a box or something like that. And thinking function over form, okay? Instead of focusing on the box, we focus on the purpose. So what's the purpose of this box, this teva, this ark? Right, it's protection. It's intended to be filled with something or someone. Noah and his family, and all the animals that are going to be represented by what the Creator brings to him to place upon the ark. So anytime we see something like this, we see a container, for instance, it's really easy to kind of get focused on the dimensions of the ark, and there are reasons that he gave them the dimensions. And by the way, I'm not going to get into all that, but because I want to focus on the function of it. And so it was supposed to be filled with Noah and his family. When Israel builds the sanctuary, the Bible describes in great detail what the dimensions are going to be, the width, the breadth, the height, all these different things, the different components that we're going to go into building the sanctuary, the hooks, the clasps, the bars, the screens, the veils, all these different things. And all of those things are very, very important. However, if the Creator's presence doesn't dwell there, then all of those things mean nothing, right? We all agree. So again, it's another example of function over form. So the ark, or the teva, the word means a box or an empty container, but it's something that is intended to be filled. And this particular box or boat was not designed to be navigated necessarily. It wasn't a sailboat. It was designed to float. And so we don't see Noah as some great mariner. Now, he's hanging on for dear life. Now, those are my words, okay? But the idea here is this: Noah's not going to navigate this ship through the waters. It's going to float. And so how it's going to navigate is going to be left to the mercy of God, quite frankly. It wasn't left to Noah, it was left to the Creator. And that would suggest then it was never intended it to be an abode, a residence. It was never intended to be someplace that he was going to stay. It was a temporary situation that was focused on his salvation, something that is not determined by mankind, and not just his salvation, but in a sense, at least indirectly, our salvation as well. Because, and I think I've posed this question before, I guess, Beth, I'm going to need some water. Something all of a sudden is getting stuck here. If you think about the fact that Noah is, according to Peter, a preacher of righteousness, and I'm of the opinion that he was building the ark about 100 years. Some people believe it's 120 years, but it was, a pretty good while. So he was a preacher of righteousness during all this time. Now, how good of a preacher was he? If we measure it the way we typically do, numbers, how good of a preacher was he? He was lousy. The only people he could manage to get onto the boat were his wife, his sons, and their daughters, all right? But then if you think about it in terms of, because he was obedient and he moved with fear, according to the writer of Hebrews, because he was obedient, you and I are here today. And so every one of us owe a debt of gratitude to Noah. Thank you, ma'am. Do what? No, thank you. We owe a debt of gratitude to Noah for his obedience, because theoretically, I know that the Father would have found a way. If he doesn't raise up Noah, he's going to raise up somebody else. If I don't do what I'm supposed to do, he's going to find somebody else. If you don't do what you're supposed to do, he'll find somebody to take your place. He will have his way. But theoretically speaking, none of us would be here today if Noah had not been obedient. So it was a means of salvation. Now he did, even though he's not going to navigate it, it's going to do what it's going to do according to the Creator's will. It's going to find its way and come to rest on the mountains of Ararat later. And that was, I think, by design. But he did have a responsibility in this. He was told to build the ark and do it just this way. And there was a reason the Creator told him to do it just this way, this high, this long, this wide, make it out of this wood, pitch it in without, etc. He had a responsibility to do everything exactly the way the Creator told him to do it, or else what would we suspect might happen? It wouldn't survive. So he had to play his part in that as well. I link that idea with what we see during the Passover. The Creator gave Israel certain instructions. You take a male lamb of the first year without spot or blemish. You slaughter it on such and such a day. You take the blood, you put it on the doorposts and lintels of your home. You go inside, shut the door, you eat the lamb with the matzah and the bitter herbs, and when I see the blood, I'm going to pass over you. So, presumably, what happens to those firstborn whose father does not follow those instructions? They perish. So we have a responsibility in this as well. There are things that we are supposed to do. We cannot save ourselves. We all understand that. But we shouldn't just sit in a chair, twiddle our thumbs, and expect that the Father's just going to drop everything into our laps. He put us here to do something and to serve His purposes. Because moving with fear as Noah did and going about the building process, don't you imagine that caught the attention of a lot of people? Now, I haven't seen the movie that everybody talks about that came out not too long ago. I understand it was kind of weird. Pardon. But anything I've ever seen, any kind of biblical, dramatization, when Noah's building his ark, there's always people around wanting to know what you're doing. Many years ago, some of you may remember the Christian group David and the Giants. Is anybody besides me? William. That's it? Oh, man. Well, anyway, they had a song about Noah, and it was called Noah. And basically the song was these guys coming up to this guy building this boat, and they're asking him what he's doing. They start out, hey, what are you doing? Come on, what's going on? By the end of the song, they're, Noah, let us in, that kind of thing. So my point here is, if you think about what he had to do, he and his sons, and he's preaching, he's a preacher of righteousness. Remember, earlier in Genesis 6, he is a just man. He's a tzaddik. He walked with God. He was perfect, or tamim, in his generations, undefiled in his generations. So what is he preaching? Well, I would presume he's saying, look, there's some trouble coming. But here's a way to avoid that trouble. Abandon these ways, quit doing these things, and start doing what is right. Okay? Which then would introduce this idea. And I'm jumping all over the place here, I know. But later we're going to see that the Creator tells him to take 7, let me just read it. In verse 2 of chapter 7. Take with you 7 each of every clean animal, a male and his female, 2 each of animals that are unclean, a male and his female. And so 7 each of clean animals, and a pair, male and female, of unclean animals. And here's my point. Before Moses, before Sinai, before any of that, guess what? People already knew the difference between clean and unclean, holy and profane. Abel offered a more excellent sacrifice. How did he know to offer a more excellent sacrifice? Because God's word is eternal. And so Noah was preaching righteousness, doing what was right. There were these things that maybe were codified at Sinai, but were already known to those who followed the one and only God. All right? So he's preaching these things. My point would be here, if we're living in the days that Messiah described as being like the days of Noah, when men are eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage, and the one who stands out in that day and age was a man by the name of Noah, who is a preacher of righteousness, would that not insinuate that you and I, understanding the days in which we live, what should we be doing? We should be preachers of righteousness. We should be the ones who are living an example before people of what is clean, what is holy, to distinguish from what is unclean and what is profane. Why? Because there is going to come a day when that door is going to shut. And once he shuts that door, nobody can open it. Right? That's Bible. He will shut that door at some point. So in the meantime, one of the reasons he's wanting you and I to live a set-apart life is not just so that we will be different, but that we will be in a position to make a difference in other people's lives so that they too can, metaphorically speaking, come into the ark. So this activity, building the ark according to the Creator's design and his description of it, yes, it's going to be for the saving of his family, but it also provided opportunity for those who would listen to what he had to say to come into the ark. All right, so now let me go ahead, go on here. It said that he was to make it of gopher wood. And I know there's that temptation to say gopher. But it's gopher. And what kind of wood is gopher wood? I have no idea. In fact, this is the only time it's used in Scripture. And there are a lot of different theories about what it is. I have no idea. But it says to make it of gopher wood. So the one thing that I did come upon many years ago is that the belief that this particular kind of wood was something that would not allow seepage of water through it. But they're going to pitch it within and without. And the word, and I write these things down for the benefit of our folks who are doing the Hebrew. Telma, what lesson are you on now? 4. Number 4? How's it going? Well, good. All right, Bill, get it together. All right, this is the root word that is translated in verse 14. Make yourself an ark, that's teva, of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it. That word cover and the word pitch. They're two different Hebrew words, but they all come from the same root word, kafer. Kafer. It means to cover. Here's how you've heard the word. Yom Kippur. Okay? Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonement. You know what a kippah is, right? What's a kippah? Some people call it a yarmulke, but it's a kippah. All right? Where does that word kippah come from? It's related to this word right here because it's something that covers. All right? So what he's saying is, I want you to make this box. It's going to be certain dimensions, this high, this wide, this long, all these different things. Make it out of this wood, and I want you to cover it in and out. And so there's a picture being painted for us here. There are some mechanical things that are being done, practical things that are being done, but at the same time, the Creator's kind of painting a picture for us as he's covering this inside and out with this pitch. So I thought it was important that you know that that word is related to the word kippur or kippur, as in the Day of Atonement. And then it says that you are to make rooms, and in Hebrew, literally what that means is nests, these little shelters within the ark that you're to make for all the different animals. But I was hesitant to even get into this because it may introduce controversy. I'm not sure, but it's in the Bible, so I'm going to share it with you. It says in verse 16 that you shall make a window for the ark. Does anybody have a translation that uses a different word than window? I'm curious. What does yours say? What does it say? A roof. Okay. What does yours say, Aaron?
Opening.
An opening. Okay. Anyone else? All right. Here's the word in Hebrew. Oh, you can't see it? Oh, I'm sorry, Jonathan, we're on the tablet, brother. I'm sorry. I'm writing the Hebrew word up here. All right, here's the word that's translated as window. Anybody want to try it? Zohar. Light. It's translated window. Yours was roof, right? Yours was opening. But the word in Hebrew, Zohar, means light, which is kind of interesting. To make a light. Now, how is he going to make a light? All right, somebody said, oh, it's a skylight. All right? All right, maybe. All right, but the word is light, and it's very unusual that we use this kind of word because that word in Hebrew, it's almost the idea of a circle of light, something that is radiant. All right? And so this gets into a lot of rabbinical commentary that we won't go too far down that road. But the idea here is there's something extraordinary that Noah is making in this opening. All right? And in some Jewish renderings of this, they actually put it this way, that it was a precious stone. That it was a precious stone that somehow or another accommodated a light, something from the outside, and it radiates inside, giving off light, which is kind of interesting considering that he's building something that is intended for their salvation, right? And there's certain dimensions it's got to be covered in and it's got to be covered out. Everything's got to be covered. So it won't allow that seepage of that water. So that everybody that's inside is going to be protected. And then if there is this window or this light in the top that is a precious stone, you see where I'm going with this, I hope. All right? Well, let me help you out with here. I'm going to read to you from a rabbinical source, and I'm just reading this just for the sake of interest. It says, during the entire 12 months that Noah was in the ark, he did not require the light of the sun by day or the light of the moon by night, but he had a polished gem which he hung up. And when it as dim, he knew that it was day, and when it shone, he knew it was night. Now, whether that's actually the way it happened or not, you can take it for what it's worth. But it is a very kind of an interesting concept. Here's why. Because in 1 Peter chapter 2, it says this, that we are to come to him as to a living stone, or there are other passages where that living stone is also called a precious stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by God and precious. So we know that the Messiah is the precious stone. He's the one that is our light to guide us through this process that you and I are in. In Revelation chapter 21, verse 10, it says this, he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, and he showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. And her light was like a most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. And then skipping on down to verse 23, it says, and the city had no need of the sun or of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God illuminated it. The Lamb is its light. Kind of interesting when you consider that the New Jerusalem is basically a 4-square box. But what is its purpose? Why is there a New Jerusalem? It's to be inhabited, right? It's to be filled with people, right? And not just any people, right? It's to be filled with his people. Because what has his purpose or his desire been from the very beginning? A relationship with you and me. He wanted to build a house. That's why Bereshit begins with the letter Beit, which is a house. He wanted to build a house. And what does the Beit look like? Let me erase this for just a moment. It's kind of a box. And it needs to be filled. That's what a Beit is. That's what a house is. It's a box. And a lot of people put a lot of effort and money and energy and everything into the outside of the box. But what is it really designed to do? To be filled on the inside. Because what is a home really? It's not wood and timber and all those kinds of things, is it? It's what goes on inside. So even though Noah was not building something that was to be a permanent abode, nevertheless, it is something that is supposed to be filled. And just the fact that there's this possibility that there was this precious stone that was actually providing light in this is fascinating to me. All right, so let's go on, and I'm gonna go a little longer, and then I'm gonna pause and for some questions or comments if you have them. Let me find where I was. All right, so he told him. Let me go back over and read. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window or that light for the ark. You shall finish it to a cubit from above and set the door of the ark in its side. So it had an opening in its side, and it had 3 levels. And here's in my notes something that I thought was kind of interesting. The ark houses everything that the world is going to need to be repopulated. The seed is there, so to speak. If you were with me in the very beginning, we started in creation. We talked about how in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And in that verse, it's as if the Creator plants the seed. And out of that seed comes everything that we see developing in day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 in the creation. Because by faith we understand that the worlds were framed how? By the Word of God, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 3. And in Mark chapter 4, how does the Messiah describe the Word of God and how it works? It's in the parable of the seed and the sower. A sower goes out and he sows seed. Some falls by the wayside, it gets snatched up by birds. Some falls on the stony ground, and because it has no depth of earth, it grows up really fast. But as soon as the sun comes out, trouble, tribulation, it melts away. Some falls among the thorns and thistles, and it gets choked out by the cares of life. But some of it falls on good ground, and it produces fruit, some 30, some 60, some 100-fold. And so he tells us that the seed is the word. So in the beginning, God planted a seed. Sidebar. Have you ever seen that Paul Harvey thing about God created a farmer? You ever seen that? Go on YouTube and look up, is it Paul Harvey, right? Yeah. That he created a farmer or something like that. So God made the farmer. Thank you. That's the correct way. But look it up. And here's why I find it so interesting. Because what did God establish the very first thing? A city or a garden? So the Creator is very interested in fields and seed and fruit and those things where, we go and get our hands dirty because He teaches us through those things. So in the ark, and here was my point, everything that's needed for life to start over again in His earth is in that ark. It's like it's got the seed. And that would make sense to me since it's a picture of the Messiah and the salvation that we find in the Messiah. And He is that seed that impregnates us when we're born again and makes it possible for life to come forth in us and our families and our congregations and things. Because out of its side, when that side is opened up, when that door is opened up, out is going to come male and female. And when they emerge from this ark, it's from those 3 different levels, corresponding perhaps to body, mind, and spirit. But everything is emerging from the side of the ark. All right, I know I'm jumping all around here. That's what's going on in this brain. You're just going to have to deal with it here. But you think about when Messiah is hanging on that tree, and He's got the crown of thorns. We know He's got the spikes through His wrists. He's got spike through His feet. But the Bible draws specific attention to the fact that a centurion came and threw a lance up into His side. And when he did that, out issued blood and water because they were checking to see if he's dead, right? And so the cut in his side seems to be, heavily emphasized. And why? Well, my mind goes back to the man, the first Adam, and the Creator said, it's not good for man to be alone. I'm going to make him a helpmate. I'm going to make him the ezer kenegdo, the help like his opposite. And so He caused this slumber to fall upon the man. And what did He do? He removed that zad, that rib or the side from his side. And He closed up the flesh thereof. Well, if He had to close up the flesh, what did He first have to do? he had to cut into his side. And out of that side, he removed that from which he made the woman, that other body that he's going to present to the man, so that when they become one flesh, now life is possible. So when Messiah was hanging on that tree and he's the last Adam, that cut is made in his side. That's emblematic of the fact that you and I can come into and become part of this family. That's how he made that other body that the world has for all these years called the church. Whatever you want to call it, the idea is he was allowing us to come in to be part of that family. Why? Because when these two come together as one, what happens? Life. Life. Did I go too fast or did you follow me there? Okay. So out of this ark, out of its side, is going to come everything that is needed in order to produce life in the earth. One other thought too, and I think we've probably talked about this before. But let's bring in the parable of the wheat and the tare. The man has a field. Messiah tells us the field is the world. And he sows good seed in his field. And we know that there's only one good seed because there's only one word of God. So we know that he's sowing, symbolically, he's sowing the word of God in the world. Why? Because he wants it to grow up and to produce what? Wheat. And what does the wheat represent according to the Messiah? The sons of the kingdom. So he always wanted the world to be filled with who? Us, you, me, us, the sons of the kingdom. It was not his intention that the field be sown with wheat and tares. It was not his intention that the field be sown with the sons of the kingdom and the sons of the wicked one. The enemy introduced that. So he wanted to get rid of all of the corrupt, the violence, the wickedness, the evil. And so what did he do to his field in the days of Noah? He flooded it. He flooded his field to get rid of all of the weeds and all of the things that weren't fruitful. But he reserved some pure seed. And from that seed, that remnant, he preserves it. And then when the waters abate off the field, what is he going to do? He's going to introduce that pure seed back into the ground with the idea of filling it up with the sons of the kingdom. Didn't last very long, did it? So what's he going to do next time? He's going to burn it. He's going to burn the field, because by burning the field, it's not going to just take care of what's on the surface. It's going to go down into the earth and take care of all that stuff that's down, that's subterranean. Okay, anyway. So that's what Noah and his family were, in a sense. They were that remnant of seed that he's going to reintroduce back into the earth to fill up with the sons of the kingdom. All right, just a couple other things I was going to point out here real quick. This is the word that is translated as floodwaters or the flood. All right, Hebrew class, did that help you out, did he? Mabul, right. Mem bet vav lamed, Mabul. And here's why I think that's very interesting. Because a lot of Jewish tradition is that the flood began in the month that is currently called Mar Cheshvan or Cheshvan. And it's a word that means gloomy, dreary, the rainy season. Well, Mar Cheshvan or Cheshvan in the Bible is called Bul. It's the month of Bul, which is what Johann Lukov used to call me, Bul. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of interesting. Let's take it a step further. Mabul is related to Nabul. And Nabul is a word that means destruction. It means to prevent growth. Now, what is it that the Creator would want to prevent from growing? The tares. That's what he wants to prevent from growing, which is kind of ironic. Boy, I know I'm dancing all over the place here. Because the tare, when it's sown with the wheat, that is something that was prohibited in the book of Leviticus and the book of Deuteronomy. If you have a field, you're not to sow your field, or in Deuteronomy, your vineyard, with mingled seed. You're not supposed to sow two different species of seed in the same field or the same vineyard. In the book of Deuteronomy, it talks about how your vineyard and the produce, the yield, is considered to be corrupt. And the word that is translated mingled seed is pronounced kilayim. Kilayim. Mingled seed. This is the root, and it's pronounced kala. All right, so here's why I showed you this. Because this root word kala, it means to restrict, to imprison, literally. So think about it. Why does the adversary want to sow tares in the midst of the wheat? Because he wants to restrict the wheat from propagating. He doesn't want the wheat to spread. He doesn't want the wheat to reproduce. Why do you think secularists want you to stay inside the four walls of your congregation and not go out there and tell people what's true? Because they don't want the wheat to spread. They don't want the sons of the kingdom to be propagated. They don't want the message, they don't want truth to be in the streets. They want it to be restricted. They want it to be imprisoned. So that's what mingling things that are unclean with those things that are clean, mingling those things that are unholy with those things that are holy, it's designed to restrict, to imprison the wheat in this case. Okay? The sons of the kingdom. But what is the kingdom of heaven designed to do? Break out, advance, move forward. Okay? So going back to this word, it means to prevent growth. It means destruction. What is the Creator wanting to prevent from growing? He doesn't want the tares to spread, right? He wants those things to be eradicated. So it's just kind of an interesting chess match that's going on behind the scenes, under the surface of the text. To me, it's fascinating. I want to show you another word here. The word mabul, which is translated flood or floodwaters, is related to the word nabul, which means to destruction, to prevent growth. And both of those words are in turn related to this word. Get rid of this. That is a derivative of it, but the root is Baval. You've heard it Bavel, Babylon, because that word means to confound or to confuse. So in a sense, what was the floodwaters intended to do? Yeah, we can focus on the destruction of the wicked, the removing of those things that are unclean, the chaos, the violence, and all those things. But it's also in an effort to confound and to confuse what the adversary's purposes are. Right? To confound and confuse. So I could flip that over and look on the other side of that coin and say that the adversary's intentions are to confound and confuse as well, or they are confusing, however you want to look at it. But the point is that the Creator, He's a God of order, right? He's not a God of confusion, but He will do things to confound those who think they are wise, right? In fact, what does He take to confound the wise? Foolish things, right? Things that people go, that doesn't make any sense. All right, y'all still with me? Yes. All right, so I wanted to get to that point because next week, what we'll probably start getting into is what happens in Genesis chapter 10, what happens in Genesis chapter 11 with Babel, because there is a connection. Let me share something here with you real quick, and because I need to look at my notes here so that I won't tell you wrong. And this will kind of set it up for what we'll get into maybe next week. I'll write it this way. Maybe you'll recognize it. Shinar. That word is something that it means to shake off or shaking out. There is a tradition, a legend. We won't say this is absolutely the way it was, but there is a tradition that as the flood waters are abating off of the earth, and all of those corpses and things are out there. By the way, we didn't read it tonight. Maybe we'll come back to it next week. But remember, he sends the raven and the dove out first. Remember? Now, the dove can't find a place to rest, so the dove returns. But what does it tell us about the raven? He never returns. So he waits 7 days and he sends the dove out again. And when the dove returns, it's got an olive branch plucked. And that's the sign to Noah that the floodwaters have abated. All right? So why didn't the raven return? Because the raven is an unclean bird. What is it doing? It's feasting on the corpses that are out there. Right? That's why it doesn't return. But the dove is a clean bird. Right? It's not going to do that. So it can't find a place to rest, so it's going to return. But later on, like I said, he brings, 7 days later, sends him out again. And in the Yonah, the dove returns with an olive branch plucked from a tree. We do need to come back to that next week because that's very significant. All right. But anyway, all these corpses and all this death and destruction and foul things, tradition is the floodwaters are abating off the earth. A lot of this stuff ended up in kind of one spot. And that one spot became known as the land of Shinar. Now, this is a legend, but think about it this way. If that is true, then what was Babylon founded upon? Literally founded upon corruption, decay, death, those kinds of things. And the fact that the word for flood is thematically related to the word Baval or Bavel is why I'm even bringing it out, because it's an interesting connection. Now, I don't have a problem believing that's very, very likely, because it would be like the Creator to say that, and everything that's represented by all those dead corpses is what Babylon is. That is the epitome of what it is. That's what it's founded upon: death, destruction, rebellion, etc. So take it or leave it. I thought that was kind of interesting. But if that was true, then it's measure for measure. They corrupted his creation. So measure for measure. He put all that corruption in one spot, and everything they created is going to be founded upon that, and that's why it won't stand. Oh. Man, there was some other things I was going to talk about, but it's 8:10. I wanted us not to get too late tonight so that everybody has time to get home before the weather moves through. But I am going to share one other thing. And I'm going to connect it to that thought that we just shared just then. And then we'll open it up for questions and comments. If you go back in Genesis chapter 5, you see the genealogy from Adam all the way to Noah. I don't know if you've ever done this or not, but if you can, if you write it on a piece of paper and write those guys' names down and how long they lived, a couple things you'll discover. Number one, Adam lived to see all of those descendants with the exception of Noah. He lived long enough to presumably anyway, to come face to face with Lamech, the son of Noah. He just died before Noah was born, which is fascinating. All right. Something else you'll discover, that when you come to Noah, it would seem that Noah would have been born 1,056 years after time began, according to the genealogy in Genesis chapter 5. All right. So if I were to write that in Hebrew, I would write it Aleph, and then I would write Nun, and I would write Vav. So I was looking at this a long time ago, and I thought, What's the possibility that he gives us the ages that they were, the men were when these sons were born to them, but he doesn't put it in ages, in years and months? In other words, what's the possibility that Adam was exactly that age when Seth was born to him? Just, to the day. And what's the chance that Seth was, however old he was, exactly when his son Enosh was born to him? In other words, maybe he was that many years plus 3 months. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? All right, let me see if I can make it a little clearer. My dad was 26 when I was born, and he was born in 1937. Do the math. What year was I born in? He was born in 1937. He was 26 when I was born. What year was I born in? 63. Very good. Give yourself a gold star. Okay. I was 24 when Brandon was born. So tell me what year he was born in. No, we're not doing it that way. I was born in 63, okay? I was 24 when he was born. 87. Except he was born in 1988. You see what I'm saying? Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. Here's why I think that's important to take a look at. Because if these guys had a few more months added on to those years, you average it out, and I won't go through the process that I did, but you average it out, it could be that Noah was not born exactly 1,056 years later, but the average, if I add certain months to all those, it would be, it might be that he was born in the year 1058 after the creation. And that would be interesting because I would write that in Hebrew this way. And there's the name Noah right there. Because you see, Lamech, when he named him Noah, he did it prophetically. Because he said, he is going to bring us rest from this curse that is upon the earth. All right? If that's possible, we'll just put it that way. If it's possible, then we know that Noah was 500 years old when he received the command to build the ark. If I write that in Hebrew, I got to, let's see. Why did it do that? If he were 500 years old, I would write that year 1558 with Aleph, Tav, Kuf, Nun, Chet. And that would mean wipe the slate clean. Interesting. Or at least I think it is. So, it makes me wonder if maybe he wasn't born in the year 1058. So all that leads me to this final thought. In March of 1997, Beth and I had just moved from Florida we lived in Polk County, and we lived out in a little box out there in the county. But in March of 1997, something very fascinating happened. Many of you probably remember it. It was the Hale-Bopp comet. You remember that? Okay. And I remember standing out, and it was Purim. It was the night of Purim. And I went outside, and there was a lunar eclipse that night, and at the same time, the Hale-Bopp comet was in the night sky. And it was all visible with the naked eye. And I'm like, okay, you're saying something. Not sure what it is. All right. So I got to studying this Hale-Bopp comet. I got involved with a guy a gentleman who was out west, and he's a biblical astronomer. And he turned me on to some information. And I got to studying this thing and found out that the last time the Hale-Bopp comet had been viewed by man from Earth would have been about, in terms of Hebrew years, it would have been about the year 1558, which is when Noah may have received the instruction to build the ark. All right? And there is some rabbinical work called the Seder Olam Rabbah that says that when Noah received the instruction to build the ark, that there was a sign in the heavens, and that was his confirmation to do that. And if that's true, and if astronomers were correct, NASA, by the way, and I know that some people don't believe NASA. Don't get into that, Bill. Anyway, but if they were correct, then the last time this particular comet was seen was about the time that Noah was instructed to build the ark. All right? So I'm thinking along these lines, and I followed the trajectory. I didn't. I just reported on it. But as the Hale-Bopp comet was moving out of sight, it was just faint, and we were just, seeing the tail end of it, so to speak. It was in a constellation that the older name for it, it's called Argo now, but the older name for it was Teva, which is what? The Ark. Now, the current name Argo, it goes back to Jason and the Argonauts and, going on their voyage for the Golden Fleece and all that. But originally it was called Teva because it was about a boat. And so that disappeared in the constellation that used to be connected to the idea of Noah's Ark. And at the same time, there was a movie coming out, and this is in, December 1997. And the name of the movie was Titanic. So now I'm thinking, all right, you're messing with me now, all right? Because what was that story about? It was a ship, grandest ship the world had ever seen at that time, and it was supposed to be virtually unsinkable, right? And men built it, men designed it, men manned it, they navigated it, they just were very proud of themselves. Then what happened? The ship that couldn't sink, it sunk, all right? So it was almost like the Creator was, sending a message. So I said all of that to say this. I truly do believe that we're living in the days of Noah. By the way, the Titanic gets its name from the Titans, not the giants. The Titans. Those things that were focused on form. How big are they? All right. Anyway, so I just thought it was kind of an interesting way to kind of wrap up tonight. Does anybody have any comments they'd like to make and, throw something at me? Bill, you're crazy, or, Yes, Ingrid. Beth, I need you to help me out. Okay? Brandon? Never mind, I see it. Take Ingrid the microphone, please.
We have this thing where there's so much electricity, we shock each other all the time.
We just have that kind of chemistry.
I actually think it's kind of interesting because I guess the thought of fire as the second destroyer, I don't know, it's always kind of a little bit, being honest, just put some fear in me a little bit. I don't know why. Don't want to burn. But just the thought of going back to the farmer part, flooding a field and then burning a field. And this may not be revelation to anybody else, but when you burn a field, what it does is put nutrients back into the soil, and it'll burn the plants that are there, but it actually benefits those plants that are going to come up, the seeds that are coming up when you burn it. So when you said that, I just, from an agricultural standpoint, I don't know, it's just cool to me that, yeah.
I think it is. I knew that, but I didn't think about it.
It revitalizes the land, basically.
It renews it, right? Regenerates it, right? I think I saw those words in the Bible every now and then. It's a renewed earth, right? Not a new heaven and new earth. It's a renewed earth. Yeah. So thank you. Yes.
So I thought it was kind of funny when you said Zohar. A couple years ago, we had a lizard that came out around like November, and it like froze. We found it out in the yard, a little knoll. And when we were trying to find a name for it, I was like, Zohar, that sounds like a nice name. And we looked it up, and I remember reading like being like, it's a brilliant light, or the brilliant light, or the smart light. And I was like, that's interesting the way they described the light.
Yeah. I know that some people are familiar with a collection of works called the Zohar. And that's not really what we're talking about here, but that's just the word for light. And so they took that word, that's this brilliant light, to describe these collection of works. But that's a unique light, though. It's not just an ordinary light. It's something that's very unique, brilliant, precious.
And then the second thing is that they're building a second Titanic either next year or the year after.
I'm not getting on that. That's like thumbing your nose at the Almighty, you know? I have no idea who was next, so I'm going to let you decide. Okay.
Bill, you were talking about mixing seeds and that. In today's world, with the scientists or whatever you want to call them, they say that if you put different flowers in your vegetable garden, it chases the bugs away. They won't attack the plants that you're trying to grow for food.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's mixing in them, but it's doing it for a better purpose. What's your outlook on that?
This is why I have little cubicles in my garden, raised beds. I have many fields in my garden. So I don't know. You know, I know that there are some, in my mind, it's like kind. You know, there are some things that they may be a different plant per se, but they're the same kind, like different varieties of tomatoes, or, you know, you've got, you know, different squashes and things like that. That's kind of my general take on it. But as far, you know, like one time, you know, I was debating within myself, you know, the Native American way of growing certain things. They had the three sisters. You know, they had corn, they had squash, and beans, and they would kind of plant them together. And I'm thinking, you know, I don't know. And so until I get something a little more settled in my heart about that, I don't do it that way. You know, I try to keep those things, you know, the different kinds, kind of keep them separated. But more than just squash and beans and flowers and things like that. The idea is you don't want to put two things together that shouldn't be together, that were never intended to be together. And I tend to think that in terms of agriculture and, you know, what's going on in the world today, the most obvious transgression of this is genetically modified foods. Things that, you know, they pair, you know, spider genes with tomato genes. You know, they put human blood with other kinds of things. Those that are very obvious and blatantly not intended to go together. So I tend to kind of fall on the side that that's probably more what we're looking at, rather than if you put some, what's the flower supposed to chase all the bugs away? Marigolds, you know. I don't do that, but, you know, whether you should or shouldn't is above my pay grade, quite frankly, you know.
One other thing. In the Bible, it always talks about pitch, tar. Noah covered the ark. When he built buildings and stuff out of stone, he always put the pitch or tar between for a mortar. Yet, it's just a few years ago now, I think it's offshore, off of Israel, but not on the land of Israel.
She wasn't attacking you. She was just... I'm sorry.
Not on actually in Israel is property, but it's offshore. They've got oil now, but with all that tar, which is a product of it, I heard that they used to pop up big balls of tar that they use like that. Why isn't that there's more oil there?
Well, now that I don't know. I guess because somebody put it there for a reason, right? But I don't know. It's it's like down at the Dead Sea. There's they're finding all kinds of things down there too. They knew it was there, but now it's beginning to show up in quite in abundance now. It's almost like it's time for something to happen. So I don't know. Other than that, I really don't know. Yes, Zarek.
One of them is just a fun thing because having a dad that was a chapel assistant, so his job was to study all the different religions, and so he could accommodate that for whoever. I really got into mythology and how a lot of stuff related into different stuff together. Also, there was just a funny thing, all this stuff with the Titanic and all that. It's like the Titans from Greek mythology and Roman mythology, their downfall was thinking they were big enough to take on God. Mm-hmm. And he was like, that's cute, smack.
All right. Well, can I just tag something onto that?
Oh, yeah.
And when the Titans, this is all mythology, of course, but when the Titans thought they were big enough to take Zeus, God, down, and he smacked them down, he bound them in a place called, in Greek mythology, Tartarus. You should have heard of that before.
Yeah.
Tartarus. That's what Peter says, that these angels are bound in chains. That word is Tartarus. So anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And then the other one was a question about Halley's Comet. Is that what used to be called Bob's Comet?
Halley's is a different one. Halley's is different. Hale-Bopp, and you can go online and check all this out. Halley's Comet comes around, like every 70, 75 years, something like that, roughly. I forgot what year it came through last time. I want to say it was like around 88, 87, 90, somewhere. I don't remember. Was it? Was it? I don't really remember. Somewhere in there. Okay. But Hale-Bopp, it came, like I said, it was in 97. It was visible with the naked eye for several months. But I remember it was kind of at its peak in the springtime. And that's when it was visible with do y'all remember? I mean, it was pretty magnificent. But, it had been, I forgot the exact date according to NASA. I've got it written down somewhere. But the year, I'm writing on the tablet. I don't know if you've got that. You can bring that up, Jonathan. Let me make sure I'm right here. Yeah, that's right. The year that, in the fall of 97, it became the year 5758, which again, that 58 would be Nun Chet. It's got the name Noach. And that's really what kind of got me started on this whole thing. But it was from the spring of 97 going into the end of 97, which would put it in the year 5758. But the number of years, it was like 4,200 years. They traced its trajectory, I guess that would be the proper term, and they calculated that the last time it was seen from Earth would have been approximately 4,200 years before. So 4,200 years before would have been, in Hebrew terms, 1558, which would be right about the time that Noah was getting the instructions to build the ark, which is kind of interesting, at the very least. Yes, who? Oh, Aaron, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, another thing that you had mentioned that I thought was really interesting, it brought my mind a recollection that that sort of vortex of death. I forget what you called it, where all the
Shinar.
What was it, Shinar?
Shinar.
It reminded me of some research I had done, and the bitumen that was all around the area of Babylon, and a bitumen being sort of pitch and tar, and all the tar pits that you kind of think about maybe when you think about the post-flood era of that era, that when Nimrod was there and everything was being built up for the Tower of Babel, they used the bitumen that was there, and bitumen, most people think is just the collection of a huge amount of death. It's like oil, and bitumen is all kind of, and it's also mineral as well. But it just kind of made me think of that here you're paving, and you're using, like this gentleman said, that you're building up this city and this tower with the death, with this bitumen and stuff to build it up. Anyway, it just kind of struck me, and it was just kind of very interesting that it was this one place collected all of this, and that's maybe the reason why there's so much oil and all this and all the bitumen and stuff that was there. Anyway, it just made me think of that, and it was kind of an interesting moment there.
Well, I'll just tag on to that. Sorry. And this is kind of getting into apocryphal stuff, so we won't say this is absolutely the way it was. But that when Nimrod wanted to build the city and the tower that goes up into heaven, he specifically chose this area as a kind of a reminder to the people, look at what he did, look what he caused these people to come to, and all this kind of stuff. So it was almost an act of, again, in your face, which is interesting because it says that Nimrod was a mighty hunter, lifnei yud-he-vav-he. Lifnei literally means in the face of yud-he-vav-he. So he was, in that regard, he was a rebel. So he was just, again, if apocryphal things can be, believed, that he was very specific in why he chose this place, because it was an act of rebellion. Like, I'll show you, that kind of thing. Which is kind of in some ways related to Jonathan Cahn's concept of why they built the Tower of Freedom there where the Twin Towers fell, almost as an act of, unwittingly perhaps, an act of defiance, that you tore it down, we're going to build it up again, Who was next? Yes, Judith.
It's on. I don't know if I'm going to be able to articulate this, so it's going to be hard for you to answer, but I just was thinking about how bad the country is and our need of strong leadership and leaders who preach a strong word of God. And then because you've been on Genesis, and I was thinking about Adam, and I was thinking, they were so lost when, and Jesus said it's going to be as the day of Noah. You just were talking about it. And so when Noah came, people were totally depraved. And I was thinking when when Adam and Eve came out of the garden, they walked with God. They knew him. But did they know sin? When they got booted out, as soon as they sinned, then they experienced sin. But when he came out, we don't see it in the Bible. I don't see it in the Bible. Maybe you pick up on something. But I thought, who was their teacher? Who was out there telling the people, maybe Enoch, some of the other people that were born, were they telling the people about following God? Oh, they didn't have the law yet. Moses was given the law. But when Adam and Eve were booted out of the garden, were they just supposed to know it? I don't see it. I don't see anything where God gave him a law. And I just want to say the one thing that is big to me, it's like Adam just fell off out of the picture. Here he was, so important, walking with God, and why wasn't he the biggest evangelist, telling people, you want to follow God, I made a mistake, but we don't see him saying anything.
Well, we don't have a record of it, okay? So let's break it down a little bit. I believe that the Creator told Adam. I believe the Creator taught Adam. It's like you going back to Cain and Abel. Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground, and it says that Abel also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat. And God had respect unto Abel's mincha offering, which is a fruit of the ground offering, but he didn't have respect unto Cain's. All right, point would be, how did Abel know that in addition to the fruit of the ground offering, he should bring the firstlings of his flock and of their fat? Somebody had to teach him. The writer of Hebrews says that he offered a more excellent sacrifice, God testifying of his gifts. So Abel had to learn that from someone. I believe that was Adam. Okay, where did he learn it from? He learned it from his father. And now, Josephus goes into some of these things that the Bible doesn't necessarily record for us. And so, you'll take it for what it's worth. But Josephus, for instance, records that Adam is the one who told of the fact that God would destroy the earth twice, once with a flood of waters and then with fire. And that, Josephus recorded that, approximately 2,000 years ago. In fact, he cites that this prophecy had been written in a pillar that had been set up that had continued up until the time of the flood. Again, that's Josephus. It's not the Bible, so you'll have to take it, as you will. But the point would be there that there was at least traditions that suggested that Adam was, to some extent, doing the very thing that you were saying he probably should have been doing, because it finds its way down to Noah. Well, before that, it found its way down to Enoch, and that line through Seth. So there had to have been, the circumstantial evidence is there, that there had to have been some unbroken chain of information that would allow for Noah to be a preacher of righteousness. Now, I don't know if you were here when we said this or not. I can't remember. But when the Creator tells Noah, you take 7 each of the clean animals and you take a pair, male and female, of the unclean animals. You bring them into the ark. All right, well, that's evidence there that Noah already knew the difference between clean and unclean. Things were written down when we get to Moses and Mount Sinai, but there's circumstantial evidence that they already knew about these things. Abel already knew to offer a more excellent sacrifice. When God instructs Noah, take clean and unclean animals, it's not recorded for us that Noah said, what do you mean clean and unclean? How did they know these things? Things were handed down. The Bible records certain things and leaves a lot out, and we're left to speculate. I believe that Adam, to some extent, did exactly what you said, because this information had to start somewhere, and it seems to me that through his line there is this chain whereby we get to Noah. At his birth, his father Lamech says, he's going to give us rest from this curse that's on the ground. Well, what provoked him to say such? So there's something going on between, the lines, things behind the scenes that aren't recorded for us, but it's there if you look for it. So, but let's make this one other point. We'll move on. But Adam, the first Adam he fell short. He came up short. That's why there had to be the last Adam, the one who came and reconciled all this and gave us opportunity to be part of this family. And he's putting all these things back together. So that eventually everything will go back to the way it's supposed to be. In the meantime, we're supposed to do what you were talking about. We're supposed to be telling people in very strong terms, these things are coming. These things are happening again, and we need to be preachers of righteousness. Who was next? Okay, one online. All right, what is the significance of 3 levels in Noah's Ark? I'm sure that there is something more to it than what I am aware of. I had just mentioned, kind of in passing almost, that if the ark is a box that is intended to be inhabited temporarily, but it has everything that is going to be needed in order that life is reintroduced back into the earth, then to me it's symbolic of the fact that there's body, mind, and spirit. They came off the boat male and female. That was needful for there to be life, but it's also speaking to mind, body, and spirit. And if it's a picture of the Messiah and the salvation that we find in him, then it connects in my mind to the idea that we are to love God with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our strength, those three different levels. There's probably other things to it, probably more profound things, but that's what comes to my mind. Did God create the tares, or was Satan able to create the tares, since it's the enemy who sows the tares? I don't believe that the adversary is a creator. I believe that he is thank you, good word, perverter. He perverts what the Creator has fashioned. He takes something that is good and he blends it with something that is not good. He takes something that is clean and he blends it with something that is unclean, and he makes it to be something else. So that's what I believe. So the tares are, I think the parable of the wheat and the tare is an overview of human history, all condensed in one little parable for us. And because it connects to the idea of it was a mixed tree, it was a mingled tree that the adversary used to seduce the woman to eat something that renders death. The fact that the adversary was able to sow the tares under the cover of darkness and while men were sleeping introduces the idea that Adam wasn't doing everything he was supposed to be doing from the get-go. He was working the garden perhaps, but he was also supposed to be guarding it. And so if Messiah's talking about this other seed is sown because men are sleeping, that to me it suggests that in the beginning, Adam was not diligent to do everything he was supposed to do. You read the text, and when the woman is having this conversation with the serpent, it comes out later, guess what? Adam's right there. Because when she takes and she eats the fruit, and she gives it to her husband, who it says was with her, and he ate. So I'm of the opinion, going back to the question, I don't think that the adversary creates anything other than this. Messiah said he is the father of lies. And when he lies, he does it of his own resources. But what is a lie? Most convincing lies are always going to contain a measure of truth. So for it to be plausible, for it to be convincing, for it to seduce and deceive, there has to be something about it that kind of rings true. And that's what he puts out there. But, always concealing the poison. By the way, in Hebrew, tares is zunim, and zunim is believed to be a poisonous rye kind of grass. It doesn't produce fruit, but it produces heads that has the appearance of being fruit, and it has a toxic quality to it. All right, anyone else here? Who's got the mic? Well, you just motor mouth tonight, aren't you? I'm playing.
Yeah. As you're talking about, it wasn't written down till Moses, but it was somehow passed along. Could it be that Adam had maybe written down the stuff that he was told to do, and that was handed down and kind of perverted, and then when it came to Moses, God said, okay, this time I'm going to write it down for you so you can get it right and know what's actually right and wrong to do?
Well, I don't know. I guess anything is possible. I do think things were handed down, at the very least, word of mouth, I'm not a big proponent of the oral Torah, but there were things that were handed down, and some, believe going all the way back to at least Moses, that were handed down through tradition that finally got written down. So that's possible, all right? But it's, it doesn't tell me that happened for sure. You have to go outside of the Bible into apocryphal literature, and some of that apocryphal literature I'd stay away from, quite frankly, because it's pretty dicey, some of it anyway. Hold on, you got to wait for.
Walking off that pasta. No, I just want to kind of add or something to think about. I know that Cain and Abel, Abel was the one who seemed to follow after whatever Adam was teaching him. But when Cain killed Abel, it said that God was silent, if I'm not mistaken, for about 400 years until Seth was born. So there must have been a period of time that man existed and lived before Seth, because he said, then I have, how did he put it with Seth? He said, I have a relationship with Seth now for many years after Cain and Abel. So Cain was going on living in his way, and it sounded like he was kind of rebellious, because he killed Abel. And so there was quite a few years there that there was no, unless Adam continued to do things that he had learned without God's presence showing up.
Well, now, I'm not sure where you're getting the 400 years, because...
Maybe it wasn't 400, but there was quite a few, until Seth was born.
Well, it says Adam lived 130 years and begot a son in his own likeness after his image and named him Seth.
Okay, so after 100 and some years, so
Yeah,
there
it
was
doesn't
a
tell us
period
how
of
old he
time.
was. It doesn't tell us how old Adam was when Cain or Abel was born.
But there was a period of time in there that he begot a son after his own image. So it was, I understood that God was silent for a while there as, people developed and grew and whatever. Cain's generation and what happened to Cain's generation, there's not a lot said about that, but he seemed to fall into a rebellion by killing his brother and having to go in his own way. So was he even connected with Abraham at that time? And
Who
just
are we
as
talking about?
Well, Cain.
Cain?
When Cain
No.
sinned against, and killed Abel, what happened to Cain? Did he go live his own life and find his own, where were the people that came from him and all those things that
Genesis
happened?
chapter 4 describes all that for us, okay? At least the initial generations that came from Cain. He had a son by the name of Enoch. It's not the same Enoch that walked with God in
Yeah.
Genesis chapter,
Yeah.
later on in Genesis 5. But
So weren't they a whole group of people that weren't following after God?
well, the line of Cain in Genesis chapter 4, they seem to be antagonists, where this
Yeah.
other line, the line of Seth, you've got the righteous and you've got those that are,
Right.
following after Cain, who was of the wicked one, according to John in 1 John chapter 3. Not that he was the spawn of Satan, but he listened to that
He was
word.
more, right,
He
listening to
followed
the
that
flesh
way.
and the,
Right.
yeah.
Right. But as far as God being silent,
That must have been, I'm thinking, later
I think
on when they had
there
the
might be
400
something else you're
years.
thinking about
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
All right. All right, let me take this one over here. We're going to kind of wrap it up here in the next few minutes. Beth find it. I think somebody over here raised their hand. It says, did Noah get notified right before it rained? All right, in Genesis chapter 7, verse 1, then the Lord said to Noah, come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. And then he tells him to take the 7 unclean, male and female, the 2 each of the animals that are clean. And he says, take 7 each of the birds of the air, male and female, to keep the species alive on the face of all the earth. Verse 4 says, for after 7 more days, I will cause it to rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made. So in verse 4, he gives him that warning. He gives him a 7-day warning. Now, here is what is not written in the text, but is pretty much accepted, and that is, when you're writing all those names down and the years they lived, those names in Genesis chapter 5, you will find that Methuselah lived till the year of the flood. In fact, all right, here's his name. Metushalach. We say Methuselah, but it's Metushalach. Metu means his death. Shalach means to send something out, a shoot, to launch, to initiate something. It's tied to the idea of a plant growing up, and as it grows, it puts shoots out. And those shoots, it would be shalach. And eventually that will become the word shaliach, which is apostle. Paul was a shoot that went out to drop fruit, to drop seeds, so more plants would come up. But anyway, Metushalach, his death it starts something. It launches something. It initiates something. So that's what his name actually means. Tradition is that he died on the 11th day of the month Cheshvan. Okay? Now, if Mar Cheshvan or Cheshvan, the biblical month Bul, is the month that the flood came, then we know exactly what day the flood began. It says that in verse 11, the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month. So if the old reckoning of the calendar is correct, then the second month would be the month Cheshvan. That means that the floodwaters began on the 17th day of Cheshvan. 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11. So there is evidence suggesting that the 11th day of Cheshvan, 7 days before the flood came, Noah's grandfather, whose name means his death, starts something. He dies. And there's a 7-day mourning period, and then Noah and his family go into the ark, and God shuts the door. So, interesting. Big storm about to hit. That's what's up on my screen right here.
He said you answered his question, and I was just about to show you this. So those who have to drive, if you've got more than an hour, you need to hit the trail now.
All right, well, let's pray. Let's stop. Let's pray. Father, we thank you, first of all, for this time together. We thank you, Father, for your word. And now we pray, Father, that you'll just go with us, that you'll keep everybody safe on the road, and that you'll bring us back safely this Shabbat. We thank you for all the folks that joined us online. I pray, Father, you'll watch over them and let everything we do and say bring glory and honor to your name and to your Son, Yeshua. Amen.